They incinerated everything I had toiled for. My agricultural land, my inheritance, my aspirations, turning years of dedication into cinders in one deliberate act. But what the Homeowners Association didn't realize was that their gravest error wasn't setting my property ablaze. It was overlooking a crucial legal paper that would become the instrument of my ultimate retribution. Would they withstand the impending tempest they were about to ignite? Let me know in the comments where you're viewing this from. The morning I discovered the HOA's initial correspondence crammed in my mailbox marked the beginning of the unraveling. I recall it vividly. The sun's warmth on my skin as I gathered fresh eggs from my hens, their gentle murmurs always bringing a grin to my face. Those fowl were my kin. After half a decade on my modest farm, my 6 acres of paradise nestled just beyond the borders of Pine Creek, I cultivated the most succulent tomatoes imaginable, housed 15 contented chickens, and even had 2 goats for lawn maintenance. My grandfather bequeathed this land to me, and I transformed it into the homestead of my reveries, a haven where fireflies shimmered at twilight and the atmosphere was redolent of fresh soil. I was the original inhabitant. That's the crux of the matter. My farm predated the opulent residences of Oak Ridge Estates that began to materialize next door 3 years prior. These colossal dwellings, with their immaculate lawns and uniform mailboxes, contrasted starkly with my time-worn barn and produce gardens. Yet initially, we coexisted harmoniously until Karen Whitfield became my neighbor. Is that your rooster creating that dreadful din at 5 a.m.? Those were Karen's inaugural words to me. No salutation, no pleasantries, just grievances about my livestock. She positioned herself at our boundary line, clad in pristine white trousers and a blouse that likely exceeded my monthly expenditure on groceries. "That's Henry, and he's merely fulfilling his purpose," I elucidated with an amiable smile, attempting to foster neighborliness. "Farm animals generate sounds. That's rustic existence." Karen's lips tightened, as though she had savored something acrid. "This is no longer the countryside. This is Oak Ridge Estates, and we uphold certain standards." I cleansed my soiled hands on my denim, striving for reason. "Actually, my property lies outside Oak Ridge. I was established here before your development even commenced. Distinct zoning regulations govern my land." She peered skeptically at my henhouse, my vegetable patch, and the modest mound of compost near the fence. "We shall see. I've recently joined the HOA board, and we prohibit unsightly agricultural pursuits that depreciate our property values." I should have heeded her words more seriously. I truly should have. The letters began arriving weekly thereafter, formal-looking missives bearing the Oak Ridge Estates insignia, enumerating infractions on my property. An excessive number of chickens, unsightly gardening apparatus, inadequate fencing. Each one threatened levies that I was under no compulsion to remit, as I was not a constituent of their HOA. I retained every letter in a dossier, just in case. A premonition told me I might require them someday. Then came the grievances about odors. My compost heap was situated far from any residences, yet Karen asserted it was vitiating her backyard ambiance. She contacted municipal authorities about my goats. She photographed my property from the thoroughfare, highlighting chicken plumes that dared to drift across the boundary line. My other neighbors from Oak Ridge began to behave peculiarly as well. Individuals who formerly waved now averted their gaze when driving past. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had consistently purchased eggs from me, ceased her visits. Only Susan Miller continued to smile and converse when she ambled her canine past my property in the evenings. "Don't take it to heart," Susan confided one day, leaning against my fence. "Karen has been exhibiting images of your farm at HOA gatherings, alleging it's a sanitary peril. Some individuals are swayed, but others deem her merely troublesome. Can she genuinely effectuate anything? My property isn't even encompassed within Oak Ridge. Susan appeared apprehensive. Just exercise caution. Karen's spouse is acquainted with someone on the county zoning commission. She's been advocating for the redrawing of boundaries. I experienced troubled sleep that night, and for numerous nights thereafter. The most distressing aspect was my inability to remain and contest. My mother's health had been deteriorating for months, and she required my assistance. Annually, I dedicated 2 weeks to aiding her following her medical interventions, residing at her dwelling 3 hours distant. I couldn't postpone this excursion. She had no one else. The day preceding my departure, I observed Karen and 3 gentlemen in formal attire traversing my property line. They brandished clipboards and gestured toward various sections of my farm. Upon noticing my observation, Karen smiled. Not a cordial smile, but the kind that induces a queasy sensation in your abdomen. That evening, as I packed my luggage, I implemented supplementary safeguards. I beseeched my acquaintance, Michael, to oversee my livestock daily. I installed 2 surveillance cameras aimed at the property line and the principal areas of the farm. I even contacted the sheriff's office to apprise them of my impending absence and concerns regarding trespassing. "Don't fret unduly," Michael remarked as he assisted me in loading my vehicle the subsequent morning. "What's the worst that could transpire in a fortnight?" As I departed, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Karen stood at the periphery of her driveway, cellular phone in hand, observing me leave. The sunlight reflected off something in her garage, what appeared to be sizable crimson containers arrayed against the wall. If only I had reversed course then. If only I had remained. But my mother needed me, and I was oblivious to the fact that those 2 weeks away would exact everything I cherished. What awaited my return? I sensed something was amiss the instant I turned onto my road. The sky appeared sullied, as though smudged with a colossal pencil, and that odor, reminiscent of an immense bonfire, but more acrid, more intense. My stomach plummeted as I urged my aged truck to accelerate. The nearer I drew to home, the more potent the acrid scent became. I clutched the steering wheel with such force that my knuckles blanched. "No, no, no," I murmured, supplicating that I was mistaken. I wasn't. When my farm materialized into view, I slammed on the brakes so forcefully that my truck skidded. I couldn't fathom what I was witnessing. The exquisite garden I had sown, seed by seed, obliterated. The chicken coop I had erected with my own hands, demolished. My diminutive red barn, where I stored all my implements and provender, reduced to a charred framework against the sky. Everything was annihilated, mere heaps of ash and smoldering timber where my life's endeavor had resided just 2 weeks prior. I leaped from my truck, abandoning the door ajar, and sprinted toward what had once been my henhouse. The reek of smoke scorched my nasal passages and throat. "Henrietta, Cluck, Ruby!" I cried out, harboring a faint hope that my chickens had miraculously evaded. Only silence responded. I collapsed to my knees in the tepid ashes, my denim becoming soiled and damp. 5 years of arduous labor, of awakening at dawn, and toiling until my musculature throbbed, all eradicated. The vegetable stalls where local families would procure fresh produce, incinerated. The designated area where I cultivated blossoms for the farmer's market, nothing but earth and ash. My dwelling remained standing at the property's edge, untouched by the conflagration. But what utility was a house when everything that rendered this place a home was obliterated? I perceived the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. A gleaming white SUV, seemingly untouched by even a speck of dust, pulled up. Karen Whitfield emerged, attired in immaculate white trousers and a cerulean blouse that likely exceeded my monthly expenditure on animal feed. She exhibited no semblance of sorrow or consternation. In fact, was that a minuscule smile adorning her countenance? Behind her emerged a balding gentleman in what appeared to be a costly suit, clutching a leather portfolio beneath his arm. He ambled with the assurance of someone accustomed to prevailing. "Well, well," Karen uttered, surveying the devastation with what appeared to be gratification. "It appears the agricultural predicament has been addressed." I couldn't believe my auditory senses. "What do you signify by addressed? This is my property, my existence." My voice fractured as I gestured toward the surrounding wreckage. The gentleman cleared his throat and advanced. "Permit me to introduce myself. I am George Taylor, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association." He did not extend an offer to shake my ash-covered hand. "During your absence, we convened an emergency assembly concerning the situation your farm was engendering for our community." "Situation?" I reiterated, perplexed. Karen interjected. "The stench, the cacophony, the unsightly vista. Are you cognizant of how much my property value depreciates merely by proximity to this?" She waved her manicured hand at what had once been my farm. "We've received grievances from every homeowner on this flank of the development." George assented. "We dispatched 3 missives to you over the preceding week." "I was tending to my ailing mother," I exclaimed, my face flushing with heat. "I've been absent for a fortnight." "Not our concern," Karen retorted with a shrug. "You should have instituted arrangements." George unfurled his leather portfolio. "In accordance with HOA Bylaw 47B, subsequent to 3 unheeded notices, we possess the prerogative to undertake measures to rectify any situation that impinges upon community standards and property values." "You possess no entitlement to encroach upon my farm," I vociferated, my entire being trembling. "This land isn't even a constituent of your development. I predated it." Karen's smile broadened, revealing impeccable white dentition. "In actuality, the county rezoned this vicinity last month. Your diminutive farm is now officially integrated into Oak Ridge Estates, which signifies," she paused for emphasis, "you are subject to our regulations now." I felt as though I had been subjected to a physical blow to the abdomen. Could this possibly be veracious? I had never received any notification regarding rezoning. "So you incinerated my farm? You exterminated my livestock?" I could barely articulate the words. "That's illicit. That's felonious." George adjusted his neckwear. "We engaged a contractor to eliminate the infractions, the henhouse, compost heaps, and unauthorized structures." "If matters escalated," he shrugged, "perhaps the arid conditions contributed to the propagation." I glanced behind them and observed other neighbors from the development congregating at the periphery of my property. Some appeared discomfited, averting their gaze. Others were nodding in concurrence with Karen and George. "You cannot perpetrate this," I asserted, my voice unexpectedly composed as shock supplanted fury. "I shall summon law enforcement." "Proceed," Karen stated. "We possess all the requisite documentation. We adhered to the regulations." I commenced to utter something further when a gleam of metal caught my attention amidst the ashes near what had once been the perimeter of my garden. I could discern my property survey marker, the one the county had emplaced years prior when I initially acquired the land. It remained steadfastly planted where it had always been, untouched by the conflagration. A minuscule spark of hope flickered within me. If the marker remained in its original locus, then perhaps— "I believe you should depart now," I stated quietly, not desiring them to perceive what I had noticed. Karen guffawed. "Or what? You'll sick your fowl on us?" "Oh, wait, you cannot." Something within me snapped. I straightened, fixated my gaze directly upon her, and uttered, "You've committed a monumental blunder, Karen, and you shall rue it." For a fleeting moment, I perceived uncertainty flicker across her countenance. Then George placed his hand on her arm, and guided her back toward the SUV. "We'll afford you some time to assimilate this. You have 30 days to bring the remainder of your property into compliance with HOA standards. The rule compendium is in your mailbox." As they departed, I observed the other neighbors disperse back to their immaculate residences with their immaculate lawns, all except one woman who lingered, glancing back at me with what appeared to be genuine commiseration in her eyes. I turned away and peered once more at that survey marker, glinting in the sunlight. Something was incongruous about this zoning narrative, and I was resolved to ascertain what it was, even if it was the final act I undertook. The aroma of smoke still adhered to my attire as I sat enveloped by documents in my living room. My eyes smarted from weeping and sleep deprivation. 3 days had elapsed since I discovered my cherished farm in cinders, 3 days of ire and despondency that deprived me of slumber, seeking elucidation. "They cannot simply incinerate someone's property and evade repercussions," I murmured to myself, flipping through another county zoning document. My digits trembled as I reached for my coffee mug, my 5th cup today. Something on page 43 of the county records caught my attention. I leaned closer, my heart palpitating. The boundary line, the recent rezoning that Karen mentioned, did not encompass my entire property. I leaped up, scattering documents everywhere, and dashed to my garage, where I stowed my original property survey beneath a dust-laden plastic covering. Therein lay the answer I necessitated. The stream that meandered along the eastern perimeter of my property constituted a natural demarcation that the rezoning specifically excluded. I retrieved my cellular phone and perused images of my farm prior to its destruction. The hen house, the vegetable patch, my diminutive barn, all were situated on the eastern side of the stream. They incinerated property that wasn't even within their jurisdiction. I gasped. I required further substantiation. I contacted the county office as soon as they commenced operations. "This is Mary from the county recorder's office," a cordial voice responded. "Mary, I require corroboration regarding the rezoning of County Road 16 properties last month," I asserted, my voice imbued with urgency. Specifically, the boundary line delineated by Willow Creek. "Oh, that rezoning was exceedingly precise concerning natural boundaries," Mary rejoined. "Allow me to email you the official cartography presently." Within minutes, my printer whirred to life, producing official county maps depicting precisely what I suspected. The HOA possessed no jurisdiction over my farm, none whatsoever. I wasted no time altering my attire. Still clad in my rumpled t-shirt and denim, I seized my documents and drove directly to the county sheriff's office. "I wish to report illicit destruction of property," I informed the deputy at the front desk. His eyes widened as I elucidated what transpired and presented him with my substantiation. "Ma'am, this is grave," he stated, summoning another officer. "We necessitate your deposition and these documents." 2 hours later, I departed with a case number and a pledge of inquiry, but I was not finished. I was cognizant that the Oak Ridge Estates HOA convened their monthly assemblies on Thursday evenings. Today was Thursday. I paused at the copy shop to duplicate all my documents, then drove home to shower and change. Tonight would be momentous. I donned my finest denim and a pristine button-up shirt, nothing ostentatious but dignified. As I coiffed my damp hair, I rehearsed my impending discourse. At precisely 7:00 p.m., I entered the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center. Approximately 30 individuals sat in orderly rows, facing a long table where Karen and George sat with 3 other board members. Karen was in the midst of lamenting about someone's unapproved mailbox hue when she espied me. "This is a restricted gathering," she snapped, truncating herself mid-sentence. I smiled and ambled to the fore of the room. Actually, as a property owner impacted by HOA determinations, I possess the prerogative to be present. George cleared his throat. We shall hear from non-constituents at the assembly's conclusion. What I must impart cannot be deferred, I retorted, my voice unwavering despite my palpitating heart. I turned to address the homeowners. Were you all cognizant that your HOA illicitly incinerated my farm, and that you might be personally accountable for the damages? The room descended into silence. I could perceive the hum of the air conditioning. That's fallacious, Karen asserted, her countenance reddening. Your property was rezoned. Only partially, I interjected, brandishing my cartography. I unfurled them on a vacant chair in the front row. The official county rezoning specifically excludes the eastern portion of my property, where the stream constitutes a natural demarcation. Everything east of the stream, encompassing my henhouse, garden, and barn, remained outside your HOA's jurisdiction. Individuals commenced to murmur. A gentleman in a cerulean polo shirt arose to scrutinize my maps. George's countenance paled as he examined the documents. We adhered to the zoning cartography furnished to us. I brandished another document, this hand-drawn map bearing Karen's signature. This isn't an official document. It's entirely erroneous. The murmurs intensified. A woman in the third row arose, Susan Miller, who resided 3 dwellings distant from Karen and invariably waved when traversing my property. George, did you genuinely authenticate the boundaries prior to authorizing this? She inquired. Of course he did, Karen interjected, leaping to her feet, her designer bracelet jingling. That farm was abhorrent, foul generating din at all hours, that repugnant compost stench. It was depreciating our property values. Property values do not supersede jurisprudence, I asserted calmly. And speaking of jurisprudence, I lodged a police report today. Your actions constitute illicit destruction of private property, felonious trespass, and bestial cruelty for the fowl that perished. You cannot substantiate our involvement, Karen exclaimed. But I perceived apprehension in her eyes. I retrieved my cellular phone and played a video I had discovered on my home surveillance system. It depicted a truck bearing the Oak Ridge Estates HOA insignia arriving at my property 3 days after my departure. The date and timestamp were distinctly discernible. I possess additional footage, I stated quietly. And I've already conferred with 3 reporters who are exceedingly intrigued by how an HOA could perpetrate such a grievous blunder. Susan Miller ambled to the fore of the room. I moved to immediately suspend any board members implicated in this determination, pending inquiry. Second, called out the gentleman in the cerulean polo shirt. Karen's countenance transitioned from crimson to pallid. You cannot effectuate this. We were safeguarding our community. George raised his hand feebly. Perhaps we should consult our legal counsel before... Too late, I interjected. My legal counsel will be contacting yours tomorrow, and for your edification, she specializes in property disputes and HOA overreach. She hasn't suffered a defeat in 6 years. I gathered my documents as the assembly erupted into arguments. Some residents were shouting at Karen, others were asking George questions he couldn't answer. I walked calmly toward the exit, but Susan caught up with me. I'm so sorry about your farm, she said, touching my arm. Not all of us are like Karen. Thank you, I replied, but this isn't over. They destroyed something precious to me and they need to make it right. As I drove home, my phone rang. The caller ID showed County Sheriff's Office. Ma'am, the deputy said when I answered. We found something interesting in the fire inspector's report. The blaze wasn't started by the HOA contractors. Someone used gasoline to accelerate it. We're treating this as possible arson. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Arson? Who would do that? but deep down I already had my suspicions. What else would the investigation uncover? And how far had Karen really gone to get rid of my farm? I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. 20 missed calls. The first one was from Susan Martinez. "Have you seen the news?" she asked when I called back. "Your farm is the top story on every channel. People are furious about what the HOA did." I turned on the television and saw my burned farm on the screen. The reporter stood right where my chicken coop used to be. My hands shook as I turned up the volume. "Local farmer returns home to find property destroyed by neighboring HOA in what legal experts are calling a clear case of overreach and possible criminal action," the reporter said. My doorbell rang. A different reporter stood there with a camera. "Can you tell us how it felt to see your farm destroyed?" she asked, shoving a microphone in my face. Word spread like wildfire. By noon, my quiet country road was lined with news vans. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors I'd never even met called to offer help. Someone started an online fund for me that hit $10,000 in just 3 hours. I sat at my kitchen table with my cousin, Jennifer, the attorney. She spread out maps and documents. "The HOA messed up big time," she said, circling the creek on the map. "This natural boundary is clearly marked in the rezoning paperwork as the limit of their control. Everything east of the creek, which includes most of your farm, was never under their power." "So they burned down property they had no right to touch?" I asked. "Exactly. And that's not just a civil issue. That's criminal destruction of property. Jennifer helped me file a lawsuit naming the HOA, George, and Karen personally. The sheriff delivered their court papers that same afternoon. I watched from my window as Karen received hers. She threw a fit right there on her front lawn, screaming that I was the one breaking rules, not her. That evening, my phone rang again. It was Tom Baker, who lived 3 houses down from Karen. "You need to see something," he said. "I have security cameras that point toward your property. I caught something disturbing." Tom sent me a video. The timestamp showed 6 a.m. on the day my farm burned down. A familiar white SUV parked near my property line. Karen got out, carrying something in her hands. Was that a gas can? "I didn't think much of it until I heard what happened," Tom said. "I've already called the police." Before I could process this, someone knocked on my door. It was George, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "The HOA board had an emergency meeting," he said, his voice shaky. "They've removed me as president. Everyone's panicking about your lawsuit." "They should be," I replied. George looked down at his shoes. "They want to settle. They're offering $50,000 to rebuild." I laughed. "My attorney says this is worth 10 times that amount." "Please," George begged. "Many homeowners had nothing to do with this decision. They'll lose their homes if you push this." "You should have thought about that before burning down my farm." George wiped sweat from his forehead. "That's the thing. The HOA only approved removing your compost pile and chicken coop. We hired contractors to do it properly, but then something happened." "What do you mean?" Karen kept saying the contractors were moving too slowly. "She disappeared for an hour that morning. When she came back, she seemed excited." The fire started 30 minutes later. My mind raced back to Tom's video. Karen with the gas can. "Are you saying Karen started the fire herself?" I asked. George's face went pale. "I didn't say that, but the contractors swear they didn't start it, and Karen's been acting strange ever since." After George left, I called Jennifer again. She arrived within the hour, bringing a private investigator named Mark. "If what George hinted at is true, we need to collect evidence quickly," Mark explained. "Security footage, witness statements, anything that shows Karen's movements that day." The next morning I found a note slipped under my door. "Check the pond behind Karen's house. Look for evidence." It wasn't signed. Mark and I walked around the neighborhood pond. In the reeds, partially hidden, were 2 empty gas cans. "Don't touch anything," Mark warned, taking photos. He called the police immediately. That afternoon, the police got a search warrant for Karen's home and car. I watched from across the street as they carried out bags of evidence. Karen stood in her driveway, screaming that I was framing her. Later, Susan came over with dinner. "The HOA is falling apart," she said. "Half the board has resigned. People are talking about dissolving it completely." "What about my farm?" I asked. "People feel terrible. There's talk about a community rebuild." The next day, a local farmers market group arrived with seedlings and offers to help replant. A contractor offered to rebuild my chicken coop for free. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. But that night, things took another turn. My security camera caught someone sneaking onto my property at 2 a.m. It was Karen, placing something near what remained of my barn. When police arrived, they found a half-empty bottle of lighter fluid. The officer looked grim. "We're taking her in for questioning." As dawn broke, I sat on my porch, looking at my destroyed farm. The land looked dead, but I knew that with care it could grow again, just like my fight against the HOA. What looked like certain defeat was turning into something else entirely. My phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer. "Turn on your TV now." The local news was showing Karen being led away in handcuffs. The reporter's voice was clear. "HOA resident arrested on suspicion of arson in connection with farm property destruction." George's car pulled up. He stepped out, holding a thick folder. "What you don't know," he said, handing me the folder, "is that Karen has been trying to buy your land for months. There are plans to expand Oak Ridge Estates. Guess who's the silent partner in the development company?" I opened the folder and saw Karen's name on the business papers. Next to it was a map showing luxury homes plotted over what used to be my farm. Was this about neighborhood standards, or was it about greed all along? I couldn't sleep that night after George's strange visit. What did he mean about how the fire started? At sunrise, I walked through the ashes of my beloved farm one more time when something caught my eye. A glint of metal near where my back fence had stood. My security camera. I had completely forgotten about the small, weatherproof camera I had installed last year after some local kids had stolen vegetables. With shaking hands, I retrieved the damaged but intact camera. Could it have captured what really happened? My heart pounded as I connected it to my computer. The footage made me gasp. It showed Karen arriving early that morning, before any HOA contractors. She wore gloves and carried 2 red gas cans. The video clearly showed her pouring gasoline around my chicken coop, my compost pile, and along the edge of my garden. Then, she lit a match. The flames spread faster than she expected. Karen jumped back, looking scared for a moment, before running to her car. 20 minutes later, a truck with Valley Landscaping arrived, the HOA's contractors. The men looked shocked at the blaze already consuming my farm, but instead of calling for help, they simply left. I called my attorney immediately. "I have proof Karen deliberately set the fire herself," I said, my voice trembling with anger and relief. "The HOA contractors didn't even do the damage. They just saw it happening and left." "This changes everything," my attorney said. "This isn't just property damage anymore. It's arson." The next day, I sat across from Sheriff Davis as he reviewed the footage. His face grew darker with each passing minute. "I've known you for years," he said finally. "Never caused anyone trouble. But some folks, they just can't stand seeing others live differently." He shook his head. "I'll be paying Miss Whitfield a visit today." Word spread through town like wildfire. Within hours, my phone was ringing non-stop. Local news vans parked outside what remained of my farm. I agreed to one interview, standing tall among the ruins as I explained how my property hadn't even been under HOA jurisdiction. "I just want justice," I said into the camera. and to rebuild what was taken from me. That evening, I watched from my kitchen window as police cars pulled up to Karen's house. They let her out in handcuffs while neighbors gathered on their perfect lawns to watch. Her face was red with anger until she spotted the news cameras. Then, she ducked her head and hurried into the police car. The next weeks passed in a blur of lawyers' offices and courtrooms. The evidence against Karen was overwhelming. Not only did I have the video, but her own text messages to George revealed her plan. "I'll take care of the farm problem before the contractors arrive. They'll just think it was part of the cleanup." In court, Karen's lawyer tried to defend her. My client was simply trying to enforce community standards that she believed applied to this property. The judge peered over her glasses. By committing arson, standards that didn't even legally apply to this land? When Karen took the stand, her true colors showed through. "That farm was disgusting," she shouted. "My property values were dropping every day. Someone had to do something." The jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty. My lawsuit against the HOA proceeded separately. With Karen's criminal conviction, they knew they couldn't win and offered to settle. But I didn't want just any settlement. "I want enough to rebuild everything I lost," I told my attorney. "Plus, I want it in writing that my land will never fall under their control, no matter what rezoning happens in the future." The HOA board members looked pale when they signed the agreement. The amount they paid would increase everyone's HOA fees for years to come. George approached me after the signing. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have checked the boundaries myself instead of trusting Karen's word. Rebuilding took months. I started with the chicken coop, bigger and safer than before. Then came a new greenhouse, a barn, and replanting my garden beds. Each weekend, something surprising happened. Neighbors from Oak Ridge Estates would stop by, offering help. "I always liked your farm," one woman admitted as she helped plant tomato seedlings. "Karen didn't speak for all of us." Susan Martinez became a regular visitor, bringing her kids to learn about growing vegetables. "The HOA isn't all bad," she explained one day. "I've been elected the new president, and we're changing the rules. More sustainability, less control." 6 months after the fire, I held an open house at my rebuilt farm. To my amazement, half the neighborhood showed up, curious to see what I'd created. Children squealed with delight at the friendly chickens. Adults admired the neat rows of vegetables and the solar panels on my new barn. "Is it true you're going to teach gardening classes?" one man asked. I nodded. Every Saturday morning, free for anyone who wants to learn. A year to the day after I found my farm in ashes, I stood watching the sunrise over my thriving land. The garden was more productive than ever. My new heritage chickens laid eggs with deep orange yolks that neighbors now lined up to buy. The greenhouse allowed me to grow vegetables year-round. The same TV reporter who had covered the fire returned for a follow-up story. "How do you feel now looking at all you've rebuilt?" she asked. I smiled, watching bees buzz around my flowering apple trees. "I learned that good fences and proper property surveys make good neighbors," I said, "but also that one person's hatred doesn't define a community." As for Karen, after serving her sentence, she sold her house at a loss and moved away. The young family who bought it now brings their children to my weekend gardening classes. The HOA still exists, but under Susan's leadership, it's focused on community building rather than control. They even partnered with me to create a neighborhood farmers market in the park. That one legal detail Karen forgot to check. The property line that showed my farm technically stood outside didn't just save my land. It transformed an entire community and taught us all what really matters. Respecting each other's right to live as we choose.